There's front of house, beautiful spaces that still underneath must function like a Swiss watch. And so we're the group of people that have specialized in that and can offer that service. So most of us at TheatreDNA actually have practical experience, meaning I started off my career. I'm one of those weirdos that figured out that I like to do sound and lighting and theatrical things when I was 14 years old. So that's all I've ever done. So,
how did you figure that out?
Good question. So I was pretty lucky because I was at that time I was going to church with my parents, and they had a band, and the band said we need somebody to run monitors. And so I said, that's cool. And I played guitar and was taking guitar lessons and all that kind of stuff. So doing anything with music sounded like fun. And I was in a small town in Central California. So finding stuff to do was pretty cool, pretty important, because there wasn't a lot of stuff to do and we lived in the middle of nowhere.
When you say monitoring, does that mean like basically audio recording and checking sound levels and things?
Yeah. So if you're doing live sound, now a lot of the monitors that you see on a stage, if you're watching an award show, they have in-ears. So just like the pods that we're all wearing in our ears, they have their feedback in their ears. One of the things that happens on a live performance stage, but really live music, is when it's heavily amplified, is there's so much sound happening out of guitar amps and bass amps and the drums that a singer can't hear themselves. And then if you're on a big enough stage, you can't hear what's happening, 25 feet to your left or to your right. So they have monitors. So the old school monitors were what someone might call a wedge speaker, or those things that are sitting on the ground in front of you that have sound coming back up. And so in that, you would mix exactly what you wanted to hear. So as an example, the drummer may want to really hear the bass because that's who's kind of syncing up on stage, where the guitar player, if they're also doing background vocals, may want to hear the lead vocalist. And then the lead vocalist wants to hear enough of the drums so that they can find the beat, and enough of the guitar, and frankly, whatever they want to hear. So the monitor operator, and it used to be, it's a whole other sound console that lives on stage, is sitting on stage live. And once it's tuned in, hopefully you're not adjusting it very much, but they're sitting on stage live, adjusting all of the levels so that the person gets to hear exactly what they want to hear.
I had no idea. So the speakers you always see at the front of a stage, and this is how ignorant we are, is actually projecting sound back to the performers so they can hear what's going on.
That's exactly right. And so, the term feedback, where you hear that high-pitched squeal on a stage, that's when that monitor sound is going back into the microphone, and then it's just making a quick loop, and then that's when you hear that squelching sound. So that's why getting the monitors tuned in is really important, because you've seen Steven Tyler lean down into a monitor and scream, right? So you've really got to get it dialed in with frequencies and EQs, and now it's a lot of digital stuff. And, so when my first kind of professional gig was I toured with a band that went through Jamaica when I was 15 years old. So, I kind of was already knew what I was doing. I was large for my age, so I didn't look like a 15-year-old. I was 6'4" when I was 15.
Oh, wow.
So, my parents let me go, and I had this amazing experience. So I've kind of been, doing performing arts or entertainment or rock music and that kind of stuff since I was about 15. Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting. And so when you go to study and you go to college, is that when you first start learning more about lighting design?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's like a lot of things. We all just kind of fall into it and start doing it. And then at some point you realize, I don't know if I'm very good at this, or maybe there's a better way to do this, or have people thought about this and, formalized how to think about this. So I started off at a California community college. I'm a proud product of a community college. Because I was didn't have the money, frankly, to go to a school, and so I was going to go there and then transfer on to another school. That college happened to have a great theater program. I happened to show up on a year that the head of the technical department was on sabbatical, so they had a guy that was subbing in. So he was new, and a bunch of us were new, and we all just kind of jumped in. So that's the first time I really figured out that there was a book and a class, on lighting design, was in college. So, funny anecdote, the book that I used in college for lighting design was the person who was the theater consultant who I worked with, that then headhunted me and brought me to the firm. So the funny story is the first time I met him, we were having a meeting and talking about the lighting positions in the new theater. And so it was part of the programming, as you would imagine and you understand as architects. It was part of the artistic programming, the performance, meaning performance related, performing arts related programming, and understanding all the needs and the wants. And so we were having a session focused on just the theatrical lighting in the building and the systems and the angles and the positions and all that stuff. So I had this wonderful meeting with this nice elderly gentleman. I was pretty forward with what I wanted. I was very strong in my opinions because I was making sure that we got what we wanted in the building. And when we left the room, the guy that I worked for hit me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, I'm making sure we get this amazing lighting system. And he said, "But you were just sitting there arguing with Richard Pilbrow." And I said, "Yeah, what's your point?" I think his name is Richard. Yeah. He goes, "No, Richard Pilbrow." And I go, "Why does that name sound familiar?" Picks the book up off of my desk and goes, "Richard Pilbrow." And I went, "Oh, he wrote the book on lighting design." Literally wrote the book on lighting design. So that became the beginning of a friendship with Richard Pilbrow, and he later hired me. So clearly, the moral of that story is, stand your ground and speak your beliefs, and be flexible if you need to change some stuff. But yeah, there's formal training. I went to 2 different conservatories and studied at the second one, where you studied under lighting designers and you assisted them. It's very much an apprenticeship approach, like many trades and crafts are. You learn it, and then you need to practice it and rehearse it and study it. So very much like music, where it's instruction, then you practice on your own, and then you practice in groups, and then you perform it. It's really the same with performing arts. You kind of learn things, but then you need to go off and do some of your own work, but then you need to practice and do the work, as an assistant and that kind of thing. And then eventually you start designing.
It's an interesting thing because all the things that you're describing are super, super technical. And at some point you have to acquire enough knowledge so that the endeavor becomes almost creative in its own way.
That's exactly correct. So I love Carl Jung's definition of intuition is a brief moment of clarity based upon a deep understanding of the subject. So the way that I think architects work and the way I think designers work in general, creative people work, is when you've spent enough time, studying the masters, if you will, if you spend enough time putting in the work to get the skills in and understand the physics of what you're doing, at some point, if you're lucky, then it just starts becoming intuition, and then you're just making choices. So, as they say, the great impressionists didn't study impressionists because they didn't exist. They studied the masters, right, which were realism. And then they developed that. So the only way they got to that was to start with the basics, if you will. So yeah, I agree very much so. Lighting design in particular is very much physics, right? It's all about angles and numbers. And especially these days, a single lighting fixture will have a power circuit, a data circuit. There's all these numbers that you kind of have to keep track of. And the nice part is the new equipment makes it so that you can forget about numbers and just talk about things. Like you can say, "Can you bring this up?" And your assistant or your board op will help you, and mean that you don't have to memorize 27 numbers to do something. But yeah, I have to say that one of the great pleasures of doing the same thing, which sounds crazy, and I think it is weird, to be clear, doing the same thing for 35 years, you start to develop that flow state naturally without even trying to get into it. And then you start realizing you just know stuff. Or I'll say it a different way. It's kind of like when you're looking at proportion or scale of something, or you're trying to figure out what's not working about something. You just kind of allow your intuition to take over and say, "I think it should be moved to the left 2 feet." And they go, "Why?" And I go, "I don't know, just move it to the left, see what it looks like." And then all of a sudden you move it and it clicks. I have to say, I've one of the more interesting things, and I won't say it's hard, it's taken effort, is to trust your intuition. You have to get to the point as an artist where you just don't second guess yourself. You just have to trust that and say, "I think it should be this way." If you truly, it's really truly intuition, meaning you're understanding it really deeply, and then you're allowing your being to direct you. It means you can probably figure out why the 2 feet moved to the left actually made it better, right? Like it was, well, that makes it more centered. It moves it closer to this. It moves it farther away from this. So you can articulate it after the fact, but being able to do it kind of quickly without thought, I think, is the real joy that starts to come when you really, are doing something passionately for a while, and then all of a sudden that flow starts to happen.
That's fantastic. I love that. And even honestly, for myself in the design process for architecture and interiors, it's the same thing that happens. And I love the 2 feet, the scale and proportion. That's a fantastic, that's exactly it. We're on site.
Yeah.
Someone says.
With David, it's 1/8 of an inch. If you could just change the reveal.
It's not where it should be. It's got to move.
Yeah.
And, but you're right, though. Sometimes in the moment in particular, in our case, if you're on site, I don't know why, but that's the case. And then, of course, it haunts me later. I have to think, why is that? Why was it? And sure enough, there's some kind of reason, hopefully, that I didn't, force on some logic that was not forced as to why.
Yeah,
it made sense.
That second guessing, that second guessing can kill you. So that's why I've learned to just almost trust it. And as your therapist would say to you, be kind to yourself, right? like be nice to yourself. Like just know that you did it and then do it, right? And if it's wrong, as we make mistakes, right, hourly, if not more often, just correct it and move on, but kind of just be able to trust that. I can tell you that, having been in those meetings with lots of architects and interior designers and been on site with architects and interior designers, you really do have to trust yourself to say, now that we're, as I like to say, now that we're in the full scale model, right, we're walking around the building. What is it that this tweak needs to happen? You can kind of sense it more than you can in the drawings or the BIM model.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. So going back, so you're at university and you studied scenic design. So is that set design?
Yeah, exactly. Set design. So I was lucky enough to attend Webster University. Has a conservatory of theater arts where it's a unique location, and it's in St. Louis, Missouri. So it's not in it's kind of in a, middle of the country place. But what makes it super unique is that it has the Opera Theater of St. Louis uses the same building, and the Repertory Theater of St. Louis uses the same building. So you have a conservatory training class, which means you don't get to have a job. You're not allowed, and you only take the classes they tell you. It's not, it's not a liberal arts program where you give electives. You are in a track. You work 6 days a week. Mondays are your day off. Very theatrical kind of conservatory training. And then in the same building that you're working in and your design studios are in is a major American repertory theater, Repertory Theater St. Louis, producing 10-show season. And the Opera Theater St. Louis, which is the largest American-speaking opera company in the country. And so what it meant is you had not just an opportunity to work with, the great professors and staff that was there and learn from them. You had this constant flow of professionals from all over the country and all over the world, in the case of the opera company, coming through. And so you got to grab each of those. And so some of your assignments were to work on those productions. The designers all came through and did crits. If that was what we had happening that week, they would do lectures. We would get to go sit in the theater and look at their opera set and then have them talk about it for an hour. So it was really an amazing opportunity to not just kind of look inward on what the training program was, but to also be able to look outward. So, the same kind of principle of studying architecture in a, larger city where you have all of that fodder.
Right.
Consider.
I am curious with the critiques. So you have the professionals coming in and they're showing their work, or students are showing theirs, and there's a critique that happens. That's very much the same process for many, creative educations. What is that like for scenic design? I mean, like, what is that criteria for saying that this design is better than another?
Honestly, it's exactly like architecture, right? There, and I say that to say this, and I've sat through and conducted architectural crits for stuff that we do, or special projects. There's, I would say, I think, like, hopefully a lot of higher education, or if not all higher education, the goal is to help you think and to give you guide rails and paradigms and considerations for how you think and how you approach things. No one can teach you to be a good scenic designer or a good architect. They can only teach you how to think about it, right? And give you good principles and give you a good foundation. So it's the same thing. It would be just like an architectural critique. There's going to be some things that are purely logistical, like, hey, you need a door here, right? Like, how does this thing get on stage? The door's not big enough, to have, the genie from Aladdin walk through. So make it taller, right? So there's going to be logistical criteria, right? Then there's going to be things that are just more artistically like, well, why did you decide to put a palm tree in the living room? Well, and by the way, as in architecture, if you can defend it well enough, they'll let you sit with it, right?
Huh.
So I can tell you that I'll tell you a very funny story, which I'm revealing for the first time on the podcast. I had a project due once, and it was a scenic design project, and I had to make a model. And I think we've all been there, so which is why this will be a universal story. I was way too busy, and by the way, I'm busy doing stuff in the conservatory, so it's not like I'm just messing around and busy. So I'm way too busy. I'm jamming this thing out the night before. I'm literally looking around the house for stuff. I did the thing that someone that's listening to this has done, which is taken that weird little thing in the pizza box that holds up the pizza, and I turned that into some weird piece of thing on the scenery, and it was a thrust stage. So I had this stage, and I had these long kind of tentacle platforms that fed up to this center part of a stage. And I just did it because that's what made sense to me. So it's a little bit of the intuition thing. And then when I had to present it for the critique, I had the plans, the section, and the model. And they said, tell me about that. Tell me about this. And it was for Richard III, Shakespeare. And I remember at the time, and it was the moment, it's crystallized for me. It's the moment that I learned the lesson: trust what you're about to say. You don't know what you're about to say, but just trust it. Because if you did the work, if you put in the time. So I had done the script research. I had read the play 12 times, right? I had watched the movie, because you have that option to just kind of get it into your head in a different way. And Shakespeare really is meant to be heard, not read. So you're not kind of cheating by listening to the movie. So I just started talking, and I literally, and I'll say it this way because it's what it felt like at the time, but I made up a bunch of stuff. I was like, well, Richard III is, he walks with crutches, and he's kind of mangled and gnarled, and he becomes more so throughout the piece. And so if you look at the set, you'll start to see that there's no straight lines, and everything is curved, and it's mangled, and it's all diminishing, and it kind of keeps everything off kilter, and nobody will ever be at the same level. And I just made up a bunch of stuff. And, at the end of it, they went, yeah, sounds great. Good. And then, moved to the left. And I was like, wow, like that totally worked. But that was the moment where I realized it was because I'd done all that homework that I had then been able to produce something, even if I didn't quite realize it when I was doing it, and then was able to defend it or talk about it.
Right.
So,
and just to clarify, it's not like you didn't do the research and you just BS.
Yeah, exactly. No, I just ran out of time to do the actual thing. Yeah, no, I wasn't completely bullshit.
So is that a typical kind of project that would be assigned, is to design a theater around a play? I mean, a set around a play.
In that case, I was designing a play, but I was lucky enough to go to this conservatory. Actually, the head of lighting design was also a theater consultant, which I was lucky enough to work for him when I was there. So it is very unusual to design a theater around a play, but I can tell you that we've had to. It's been done. And it's for play. It wouldn't be for a play, but it would be like for a Cirque du Soleil show. So when you're seeing some of the theaters that are in use for Cirque du Soleil, those were built for that exact production. So like in Las Vegas, right there. So I don't know how many there are now, but there were 12. So like that whole entire space was built for that production of O. Ka was a space that they took over. So it wasn't built for that, but they completely renovated it to work for that. I happened to work on the first building that Cirque du Soleil built without knowing what the production was, and it was in Tokyo Disney. And it was quite unique because we kind of just had to load it up for bear, if you will, not knowing what they were going to do in it, but knowing that they could do any one of these, 1,000 amazing, crazy things artistically. So that's kind of the only case I would say. So like a showroom, is a little bit specific, site specific stuff. I would say is that way, but no, it's pretty. It's actually quite the opposite, right? When we're working on a building, performing arts venue for a city or for a school or for a county or National Opera House, whatever it is, it's the opposite in that the job of the building is to be able to accommodate a host of things. So it's not just single use. And in fact, when we do very what you would imagine single-use spaces. So like a Walt Disney concert hall or a concert hall music-specific venue.
Mm-hmm.
Even those spaces, we're infusing them and inserting all of this cleverness and technology and capability to be able to do everything but music.
Right.
Knowing that they're going to want, a 21st century building is going to need to do everything just to be financially viable and to be interesting to the community.
Interesting. And I want to hear more about maybe the challenges with producing a theater or concert hall that's like that. I was going to say that I did actually see the Cirque du Soleil in Las Vegas long time ago. But man, it left an impression on me. I mean, that's wild. And the way they used water and I was just, actually it was before I even studied architecture, but I would imagine that somehow that affected my career choice in some way.
Absolutely. There's no way that you can see a guy walk across 2 inches of water and then a minute later see a guy jump 100 feet into the same exact spot and it not blow your mind. And then the whole thing lights on fire. Like, I mean, it's and that's the purpose of it, right? Was to kind of just keep bending and tweaking your perception in your mind. But yeah, no, absolutely. Stunning work that they do and continue to do. And just to, give a shout out, the most delightful and enjoyable work they do, they still do in tents, right? That's touring the country. It's not the big extravaganzas. It's really the stuff that's still the kind of where their heart is and where it started for them. It's still just the most amazing work. And it's not the big tricks, but it's still just quite wonderful.
Yeah. So you have a lot of experience. You've worked with a lot of different architects and some of them quite big names, Gary, Moshe Softy, OMA. We were just talking about the Warriors arena, the Golden State Warriors, and all of these things. I was kind of curious, when is the best time for you guys to get involved with these projects, and how does the whole process kind of work?
Sure. There's really two ways. So the work that we do is really working for architects or working for owners. So it depends on kind of the situation and kind of what the preferences are. But most often, I'd say 90% of the time, typical architectural process, there's an RFP or, you have a relationship with a client and you know that they're working on a performing arts building. Then that would be the point where we would work with the architect as a design team member and sit alongside everyone else, right? All the engineers, lighting designers, all that stuff. That's a pretty typical, straightforward approach. We do often, as you would imagine, we get a lot of calls from owners that are just asking questions about very early days, meaning a planning study, a feasibility study. Mm-hmm. Sometimes those involve architects and sometimes they don't. So even when an architect is called, for example, if somebody said, hey, I want to build this theater and I don't know how big it is, and I have 2 sites and I want to look at the sites. If they got to us, that's exactly the kind of work that we do, and we help, set the foundation so that we can help them understand how big things are. And then when it becomes an architectural project, then we're back to the typical approach.
I see.
If an architect was hired to do that exact job, they would then more often than not, or depending on the type of job, they would then have to call us and say, hey, I'm doing this theater. Can you come help? So that's why it really, 90% of the time we're working directly with the architect as one of the team. And, and the way we kind of always think of it is we're very, architectural projects, have a captain, they have a lead. The way we think of it is it's kind of like a coach, right? Mm-hmm. So some days the engineers, the structural engineer is the guy who needs to drive the boat. Sometimes it's the, theater consultant. So it doesn't mean that we're in charge, but we do have kind of a lot of really specific info that we work very hard. As we say, we inform and we inspire. So you can't just, I say often, to be funny, I could write everything I know down in an encyclopedia, sized edition, which for those of you that pre-Google was a bunch of books that had everything Google has in it. But, there could be, I could give you 5 feet of books and say, here's everything I know and hand it to you for free. And you still wouldn't know where to look and when to look there. Right.
Yeah.
So we just have a lot of stuff that we try to relay across. And some of it's just logistical that we cram, in design development. And some of it's more about helping understand the process and really kind of shepherding, or not shepherding, but being a valued advisor, as it's like, well, this is what we're thinking. Should it go left or should it go right? Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, you mentioned some of the signature architects that we've been privileged to work with and are working with now. It's a different kind of beast when you're in that mode, because you're really there to serve the function and, quite frankly, stay out of the way of the architecture. On its very best day, it's symbiotically form and function, right? Mm-hmm. So we talk about what we need it to do, and everything that magical that's happening is happening around that and with it. And then at the end, we all high five at the end because it works great and looks beautiful. Very rarely is anything that simple, right? Sure. So that's where it turns into as what we would call creative tension. It's their job to push things where it wants to be or is amazing and beautiful, and it's our job to maintain the function. And make sure that it still works at the end of the day, because that's, by the way, the architect's goal, right? There's no one who's saying, I just want it to be pretty and not work. We all know it needs to work. And so we really are privileged to have the opportunity to create creative tension with some of the most creative people on the planet, because that's our job, and they rely on us, frankly, to do that. It's not an unwelcome thing. And quite frankly, it's as you would imagine, it's quite the opposite. The more affluent the designer or the architecture is, the more comfortable they are with speaking truth to power and pushing back. Sure. Because they know that you're there to help them, and we're all there to get down the road. It's when you're in some maybe more regional firms, smaller projects, where you kind of push on stuff, and then it's there's opportunities to tweak things and fix things, and it's like black and white line in the sand that can't move stuff. That's that we still, as a professional, we still have to figure out how to manage this and make it all still work, but it's just kind of more literal where it shouldn't be.
Yeah, and the teamwork aspect is interesting. I would imagine in those cases, because I think anyone who is involved in a massive group project, which is what these are, has experienced something like that. And I guess it has to do with, especially if it's very regional or local, there's this mentality amongst professionals of, this is the way we do it here, so don't mess with us. Yeah. And there's a little bit of ego involved always.
Yeah, of course. We're all human. Yeah, I agree very much. I think it's, I will say, as a, I'm very naive in some ways, which I'm always shocked when there's ego involved, right? Because we're lucky enough to work with a lot of great creative people, and everyone brings what you have to the table, and then we all figure out how to make it work and move down the road. I'm always surprised when it's like, really? Oh yeah, I forgot that still happens. Okay, cool. Let's pivot on that and figure out how to still get what I need done, right? Because I still got to get it done, and I still need to help protect you, even if you don't know you need protecting. So in that case, it's it just becomes more interesting, and like anything, you can do it the easy way or the hard way. We still got to do it. So we just kind of get on with it.
I'm a bit curious. So, how big is the team at TheatreDNA, and what is your guys' background?
Yeah, so we have there's 12 of us, and we have, and I'll see if I can remember them all right. We have. I'm a lighting designer and a scenic designer. We have another lighting designer. We have a registered licensed architect who specializes in performance space design. We don't provide architectural services, but when we plan and design spaces, it means we're doing it very aware of codes. And in fact, we're typically more aware of codes on very specific nuances in the code for performing arts than our architect partners are. We have an operations person, meaning they ran theaters. We have a graduate architect who came to us from an architecture firm. We have, I'm going through the whole list. We have someone who is a technical director, meaning they weren't the scenic designer. They were the person whose job it is to build the set and hang it and make it move correctly. So the technical part of the scenic design. And we have a themed entertainment person who studied themed entertainment. And so, it's kind of a hybrid of architecture and graphic design and art and master planning. So kind of a whole bundle of that. We have a stage manager. So, we kind of, is not very cleverly, the reason that I named the firm TheatreDNA was because I was sitting around trying to think of a great name. And I was like, we've got to come up with something. So we were just, as throwing everything against the wall. And I was like, well, who do we talk to? Who do we work for? Who do we work with? And I just said, well, everybody we hire has to have theater DNA. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, check that domain. So
yeah, step 2, check the domain.
Check the domain, see if it's worth it. Now, ready for the punchline? It was taken, but it wasn't being used. So that's why our domain is mytheatredna.com, which I loved very much because it's really about, is it about your theater DNA or my theater DNA, and we're combining it. But and it's the British spelling of theater. So
I was wondering about that because that's how we spell it in French too, and I was like,
it is. Well, some people say it's interchangeable a little bit, but some people say it's the difference between the art form and the building, right? Mm-hmm. It's definitely British. And I had, the firm I worked for, the largest, oldest firm, was founded in London in 1957. Okay. So it was a British firm, and then it had an American half, as well as a office in Lille and France and all over the place.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, the R-E, I'm an American, but there's some, there's when you read it, there's some kind of gravitas.
I have to say.
With it.
And I like to think so. It was an homage to my, to my heritage. We're very respectful and honored to spend the time we did with the previous company. And for me, it was about, it's more about the art form than the building. Mm-hmm. So, that's kind of how we landed on it. And now we bring this approach where we really have practical experience. So and we still are all working designers. I don't get to work near as much as I used to, but we are still working designers. And so it's very important for me to have people that are still practicing as much as possible, because like anything, the cycles of evolution on everything in our lives now, right, is sped up. And then COVID, frankly, just sped it up even more in some ways. So it's really important for me to still be able to be in a theater and, see what's happening. So some of our folks are, one of our designers and one of my best friends, he spends most of his time working and the least amount of his time consulting. But when we need him, he's still, kind of this silver bullet of effectiveness and insight, because he's spending most of his time still working professionally.
Yeah, it's interesting. You had mentioned just now at the beginning of the recording, I think, that a lot of your people have practical experience, and that seems to be very important. And it's kind of, I'm trying to think about how it relates to maybe my experience in architecture in a way. Because with the consulting, with the planning and designing, it's all actually very, very abstract, right? Because we're all working toward building this thing, and once it's built, the maintenance for you might continue, which I want to talk about, but it's more or less done after it's constructed, right? But all before then, it's all just visualization. It's all abstract. I think there's sometimes almost a danger for professionals in our spaces where we lose touch of the practical, and we lose touch of what it means to actually be doing things. For architects, I don't really know what that means. We're not constructing the buildings, but I could kind of see where, you seem to be quite proud of the fact that the people in the office are still actively doing things, and they're not working in only the abstract space.
Right. Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. So, how does a designer, how does an architect get that same kind of approach, right? So you're not going to go work in a kitchen for 5 years so that you can learn how to design kitchens, right? But I think everyone would say, well, if you had, that'd be amazing, and you would have insights that other people don't have, right? So that's why we have kitchen consultants, right? Yeah. So because you don't want to go work in a kitchen. So what I would say is, I can tell you that what I've seen is that it's really about the thought process. To me, this is my version of this, is that you can tell the people that think about space and think about how people inhabit space, and you can tell the people that don't think that way, right? Or don't think that way holistically as a firm. So I think even more today than ever in the past, it's really important to have a point of view. But at the center of all of this is, you guys know better than me, we're building spaces for people to inhabit. My spaces that I focus on are inhabited by artists. They're inhabited by the guests that come. They're inhabited by the operational staff. They're inhabited by, the maintenance staff. But they're still spaces for people. If there were no people doing what we were designing, we would not be designing it, right? So I think the careful consideration and understanding of that before doing the design process based on all the best information we have and instincts and intuition. And then what I think is a piece that I've been privileged to watch a lot is to see how architects think about things after the fact. And that's the part that I don't have, I only know what I know from my experience, but, I was privileged once to sit in the theater at the Kaufman Center in Kansas City with Moshe Safdie and just sit in the audience. There was nobody else in the entire 1,800 seat theater except the two of us. And we were sitting and pointing at little pieces of the architecture after it's done, talking about like, well, if we were doing this again, would we have slid that over another foot? You know what I mean? And like see how the balcony, and I remember it, see how the balcony is jutting out and has a profile against the open proscenium. Mm-hmm. I think that would have been better if it wasn't that way, because it would have focused the stage picture and it was just us sitting and talking, and it was probably 43 seconds and meant more to me than it did to him, probably, very clearly. But that was a thoughtful moment, and that's something that I know for my practice. I'm the guy that you never want to go to a theater show with, because while you're watching the stage and crying, I'm up looking and going like, I wonder if that thing went to the left more, right? So I'm sure you guys do a version of the same thing when you're, in any room or any space on the planet, and thinking the same things about, considering it. But that thoughtfulness, that process, to me, is what an architect can bring to any project type, including theaters. And the most successful performing art spaces are the ones where you realize it's about people and it's about the process of people. So I'll give you a little funny anecdote, which I just which came about a couple years ago. I was talking to Steve Wolf, who was he's now passed, but he was the artistic director of the Repertory of Theater of St. Louis for, 40 years, a very, very long time. And we were planning and thinking about new spaces for the Rep. And they have a very small studio, and the studio had 4 doors that came into it. And each of the doors had a different path from the lobby. One was very direct, went straight in. One was, it was down a level. One had a circular stair that you went down, had to go down a hallway, come down another stair. But each one was different. And I said, we were talking about the new space, and he said, I'd like to have these doors like this. And I said, well, that's really interesting. Can you tell me why? Because I didn't understand the function, but it sounded very important. And he said, well, what I love to do is I never want to bring the audience into the room the same way twice. I always want them to experience a different pathway. So instead of, I'm a subscriber, I come to 5 shows a year here. I know, this is my home. Mm-hmm. I know the waiter. I high five him on the way in. I know the usher, right? Like, instead of this comfortable feeling, he wanted to create an uncomfortable feeling, or at least discombobulate them enough to be, I don't know what to expect, and I should never come here and expect the same thing twice. Mm-hmm. As an artistic director, that was the level he was thinking about the space. So when you bring that level of consideration to any space, whether it's the practical parts of dimensions and how far people reach, or it's just, I want people to experience this space. So theaters, one of the things I love about theaters is we bring people through sound and light locks, which are these vestibules to keep sound and light. So it's double doors, mm-hmm. 2 sets of doors. But what I love is when you come through a short space that's dark, and then the larger architecture kind of presents itself to you. And it's kind of this, mm-hmm. unveiling, or the curtain going up, if you will, moment when you walk into a performing arts space. So, that kind of stuff, when you start to dial in on it, you start to realize it doesn't, you make 100 of those kinds of choices, and you're starting to get to a really special kind of place where everything is meaningful, if you will. Right.
A few minutes ago, you were talking about how did you phrase it? The creative tension. I'll have to use that term in the future. Yeah. So what are some of the common challenges that you come across when you're working like with an architect, for example? Or is it more the technical things, and is it the acoustics? Sure. Is it the lighting? Is it...
Yeah, no, perfectly asked question. So we say all the time, for a really great performing arts space is like a 3-legged stool. There's an architect, a theater consultant, and an acoustician. And a stool can stand if one of those things is out of balance a little bit, but if it's too far out of balance, the stool falls over. Same is true of any performing arts space, very true of musical spaces like a concert hall. Mm-hmm. So on a concert hall, the acoustician's leg of stool is very big, they are driving the boat because acoustics are of the primary concern, really, in a concert hall. The second would be the beauty and the visual of it. And then, but we still need our third leg to make everything stand up and make the lighting work and, the lifts work and the logistics and the seating and the sight lines and all that good stuff. So the creative tension comes in areas where we're all constantly, and, it really is almost like you would imagine a round robin, right? It's like, okay, this is how we would. So one of the ways to describe what we do with performance space design is that we care a lot about the seating and the sight lines. So in some ways, we design the white model of the room quite often, not 100% of the time. Sometimes an architect has enough skill to do that and they've done it 50 times. And so we just jump in and start, making contributions. But most of the time, we design what I would call the white model. So what that means is I don't know what the material is. I don't know what the surface is. I don't know if it's wood or concrete. I don't know what the balcony front material looks like. I don't know what the shaping of the balcony front looks like. But I can tell you the first row starts here and it steps up 6.5 inches. And, I can tell you every single level and all the shaping as it goes in the side. So it's kind of like the white model. So if that was our first gesture to start the design of a room, we would immediately send it to the acoustician to say, hey, this is what we think works great. What do you think? And we do that informed, meaning we know we're not making, we're not
crazy
things that we know can't be fixed. Yeah, we're not just going crazy. We know, like, if we're doing a room that has to have an orchestra shell, that they're going to want sidewalls that are shaped a certain, they're in and not just out. And so we'll make the most educated guess we can. When we pass it to the acoustician, they are going to now say, oh, they're going to apply their art form and their physics, right? They're going to say, well, I need your overhead reflector to be more at an angle like this, and I need it to be a foot shorter or a foot longer. And so they'll just start pushing and pulling on all those pieces. And then very quickly, if not symbiotically all at the same time, the architect is doing the same thing. They're saying, well, I don't like that thing. I'm going to move it in. So on a really, if we were drawing a diagram of how this works or a workflow, if we drew the room, we give the acoustician, they shape it and do what they want with shaping and draw big red lines on stuff. And then it goes to the architect who goes, great. And then they take that on board. They, these days, get it into the model. Then it comes back to us and we say, hey, that was great, but you've got this row is off by a foot. This one, nope, you read that wrong on our sketch. This wants to go here, right? And then this shaping is here. Hey, Mr. Acoustician, you said you wanted draperies on this wall. Can I put them to start above head height, or do you want them to the ground? If you want them to the ground, I got to lose a seat next to the wall for that whole piece. They go, nope, I can start above the ground. Great. And then, we also, I just described essentially what happens for a year of DD and CD on room design, right? You're just constantly picking little pieces and figuring it out.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, right. It's just iteration. It's all about iteration. So on its best day, it's that happy. The creative tension part comes when something becomes really important and people have to say, nope, this is the best I can do for you.
Right.
Can you work around it? And as we say, kind of unofficially, our job is to always figure out how to say yes. Right? We're in support of the architecture. We're in support of the acoustics. I mean, we're a little bit, and I don't think it's a bad thing. We very much kind of subscribe to the fact that if we do our job really, really well, you never know we were there, right?
Right.
So we're kind of not offended. There's a lot of times you can find a lot of projects we work on where they'll mention the architect and the acoustician, and we're not mentioned. It'd be nice if we were mentioned. Our BD person makes a few phone calls, see if we can fix that for the future. But we that's how it is with theater technicians and theater designers. Like, as a lighting designer, if I do my job well, you won't even know that I was there. You'll just have this amazing experience and say, I saw this, amazing Richard III that was in the jungle and it was beautiful and amazing, right? You won't say, I saw these lighting fixtures that somebody focused that came up at a certain time, right? So we kind of take a little bit of joy when people, when the room works really well for the artist, works really well for the operations staff, works really well for the guests. And kind of nobody knows we were there behind the scenes, kind of kabuki style, moving stuff over. And
Right. So of the three legs of the stool, is your guys' role maybe the one that has the biggest, larger perspective and kind of overview of the entire thing to kind of catch, because the acoustician, I mean, obviously they're dealing with sound specifically. The architect is dealing with all the architect does, but in a concert hall or theater, there's like a bajillion other things to consider, I would imagine, technically. And so that falls more into your purview to make sure that all that stuff is also being thought about.
Yeah, what I would say is that there's a lot of things that we have input on. So I'll say like a dressing room or a musician's changing room.
Mm-hmm.
We'll give you a great planning guideline that says this is what we need. We need these kind of mirrors and these kind of lights, and here's an NEC code thing about the pilot light switch. We'll give a bunch of information over and then hand it off. And then we monitor it. So my shorter answer to your question is, we do essentially, we're the only people that I know of outside the architect that will review the entire building, mm-hmm. and then review the entire electrical drawing set, the entire mechanical drawing set, the entire structural drawing set, the landscape, the lighting design, because we will have asked for pieces in all of those things. So like our early schematic design work, we're issuing mechanical and plumbing guidelines because there's pieces of mechanical and plumbing everywhere. We're talking about heat loading in all the rooms that we've programmed. Structure is very important, as you would imagine. We're talking about all these things we want to hold up, or how heavy the lift is, or how a strong point that wants to be in the lobby to do temporary performances, where that goes and how much weight needs to go to it. Electrical is very important, as you would imagine. We have a lot of equipment. We essentially define the electrical in every single performance related space in a building. So if we have a 150,000 square foot building, it's probably safe to say 100,000 square feet of it is stuff that we've said, I want 6 outlets in 12 6 outlets on 3 circuits, and here's exactly where they go. So I'm kind of monitoring that later.
Right.
So, we again, the captain of the team, the coach of the team is the architect. They retain that responsibility, and we work in support of that. But we are the probably some days the annoying people that will issue drawing review notes on an entire set of drawings, all 7 volumes, right? Because we have asked for things that will be in all 7 volumes. And so it's really important for us to make sure, it's locations of things, it's flavors of things. If I need a certain piece of power in a certain place, I need to make sure it got there. And then I need to make sure it was supplied with the right electricity,
mm-hmm,
which I asked
mm-hmm.
for.
It's interesting because it seems like you guys are specialists because it's a particular building type or type of space.
That's right.
But in a way, you're also generalists because of the different faculty you guys have, the different knowledge. And so I can imagine where, certainly in addition to the red lines and all the things you mentioned, it's the foresight to say, like, this is going to be problematic later on. We should not approach it this way, or whatever it might be.
That's exactly correct. We are in a lot of meetings. And even if they don't quite know if we should be there, they'll invite us quite often, because we will be the ones that they'll do something that they think has nothing to do with nothing. I could give you 100 examples of things where people, where mistakes have been made and ended up in buildings because people never once thought that they didn't understand the criteria that we were asking for.
Sure.
Right. And so then they made a very innocent decision, either in the drawings or, frankly, it happens a lot in the field, right? Because there's field stuff that'll happen.
Yep.
And, as we all know, we wish the connection between design and field work was closer. And most of us don't have time to have somebody on site every day or even once a week, right? Depending on the job and the size and the location and all that stuff. So, I would say it's kind of a simultaneous, we really need to understand the forest and the lay of the bigger picture, but also then every single tree. Yeah. So we're constantly zooming in and out. So I would agree with you. We're very specific sometimes about understanding, isolated ground technical power and what that means for a K-rated transformer. But then I also then need to be able to say, hey, these larger kind of bigger issues where this lobby thing isn't really working well. If you could put the doors at the 2 different ends of the rooms, then the audience during the intermission won't congest so much right in the middle. So it's planning stuff, it's logistical stuff, it's technical stuff. But it's why I haven't been bored yet. I mean, I say, I say a lot. I learn something every single day, right? So it's not my job to know that you add cooled water to concrete so that you can pour it in Bogota, Colombia. But I'm in a meeting and, we're talking about structure and I got invited and we're talking about that. And then I learned that, right? So now, one of our kind of internal mottos is we try to answer every question before it's asked. That's our goal. We do not achieve it. I do not believe we will ever achieve it, right? But that's our goal, because what that means to us is we're arming you and the rest of the design team with the info you need to make good decisions. Because again, it's about the inspiration part and also the information part. Mm-hmm. So if we can say, this is why we need a 10-foot wide hallway back here, it means that when you're in the field or you're in a design meeting, you'll understand why that was that way, so that you can either defend it or go, well, it's really true here, but is it true at the far end of the hallway where you're not rolling big wide things? Because we're past the big door, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And then there's this understanding. So for us, that's important for us, is just to really make sure we keep figuring out how to give enough information and data so that people can make, the way I say it, which doesn't look good in print, but it's really the truth. We try to figure out how to help you run with scissors. That's our goal. Our goal is to, go out, make good choices. We try to give you good info, make good choices, and then, go do your worst, right? Do your worst. That's our goal. And then know that we can help figure out how to get out of a hole if that's where it landed.
Running with scissors. I mean, realistically, constructing a building, you're running with scissors, even if it's all
knives and the whole kitchen counter.
Kind of pointed at your face, maybe even. Yeah. It's an amazing thing. I mean, building buildings used to be a lot more straightforward. It used to be a lot different work pool, right? A lot different labor pool. And now it's gotten more challenging on all fronts. As you guys very well know, architecture has been able to become, in some ways, so much more interesting. Not necessarily better, depending on the project, but the fact that it can be designed digitally, and the fact that things can now be constructed digitally or cut out digitally, right, or manufactured digitally, has allowed for such a more interesting expression of form and shape and all that good stuff. So.
Talking about digital, do you guys use like 3D modeling? How do you plan for lighting? Is there like software that you use for that? Do you just go in the space with a projector and like aim it a certain way? Like, how does that work? I mean, it's already hard for us to plan spatial and shapes and volumes, but I can't imagine controlling light and planning for that.
Things more elusive, right?
Well, and so our version of lighting that we have to do as TheatreDNA is really theatrical lighting or concert lighting, lighting the platform, if you will, because that's kind of performance lighting. That's not really architectural lighting. But the short answer is, we're like everything else that you're doing in an architectural design. It's all theoretical. It's all on paper. So I can tell you, we have a very challenging project right now with the Gehry office. I don't know if you've seen some of the renderings of the Colburn School, the concert hall. But it's got this beautiful kind of Magritte cloud ceiling that Frank envisioned and came up with. And so it's quite a challenge to figure out where the lighting fits in and around that and still do its job, meaning it's very specific angles and very specific heights, but it still has to do its job. I can tell you on that case, we have the answer is yes to anything you say. It started with drawings. It started with 2D drawings. It went to 3D as quickly as we could. We printed physical models just because it was easier to kind of stick your head in it and look at it, at half-inch scale. And as you may know, sketching at the Gehry office is really about models. They scan models to make drawings in the early days. It's not, taking drawings to turn into models. So it's all instantly 3D physical space. So we would send guys to go to their office to literally sit on a stool and put their head in the model for 3 or 4 hours and take pictures and talk and mark up the pictures. And, it's quite challenging. And I will say that's the fun part of our job is that we have to figure out how to solve all these problems on paper and in the model. Now, the 3D modeling really for everything, including our work, has revolutionized it, because we're no longer trying to explain something in a 2D format where a guy's walking around with a drawing set on a job site, right? Trying to translate that. We now have it in 3D so that you can stick your head in it, look at it in a meeting and do collision detection and have a, 20-person on-site meeting with coordination meeting and be looking at something a year before it's actually there in the field. But we're coordinating it on a good day, a year ahead.
How much adjustment or changes does happen during construction when things actually, people get put in place and you can get a better in-person feeling for those things?
Yeah, there's always changes, right? I think all of us, you have to expect that. I can tell you that I think we do a sufficient job explaining things and scaring the living crap out of people that the things that we're really concerned about tend to be done very well. So, and I'll give you a really specific example. When we're doing seating and sightlines, 98% of the time, the floors are concrete. So you're pouring the finished floor, right? Because it'll be polished concrete under the seats. So that means there's no room to hide, right? You're not applying wood on top of it. You're not furring or fleshing that out later. That will be the finished floor. If you get that wrong, you are affecting the sightlines. We design sightlines down to the 1/4 inch in plan and section and elevation. If you're off, you're off, right? So there are definitely things where we will get, they'll take all the formwork off and then they'll do it. They'll check it and go, okay, we were off by, a 1/2 inch here and a 1/4 inch here and a 1/2 inch here. We'll have to look at it and go, well, okay, that's cool. I've had projects where things are off and we've had to say, you know what, you're going to have to take that out.
Yeah.
Do that again. So there, it's unpopular, but I would say this, our goal is, and I'm proud to say, I think we succeed quite often. Our goal is that you trust us enough to know when we're not going to call, we're going to be fair about it, right? There's some stuff you can let go and you have to learn to let it go. You're not going to bat 1,000 on every single element of every single project. It's just not going to happen. I mean, like handrails are a great example, right? It's Miss Metals, it's design build. We all reviewed the drawings we were blue in the face. They show up on the field and get installed by the new guy, right? They just end up being whatever they are. So right. We're out there and we have to say, look, this, you can't do this. You have to cut that off. That needs to not be here. Right. This one over here is totally not what we asked for, but we looked at it. It's fine. Just leave that one. Right. So we consider ourselves very fair. And again, we're in the same sinking lifeboat as everybody else. Our fees are now all gone. Right. Everybody wants to just get the damn thing open. I mean, so again, but our job is to hold the line if we need to hold the line.
Yeah.
But also, be fair and try to figure out when it doesn't matter. So we really try to be over communicative about this because we have really clear criteria that's very specific. And sometimes it's frustrating because people will say, well, you said this has to be 10 feet. Can it be 9 feet here? And you're like, sure. And they're like, well, if it can be 9 feet, can it be 9 feet everywhere? And you're like, no. I asked for 10, right? It can be 9 feet here because you're only doing it for 3 feet of the hallway, right? But can it be 8 feet here? Yeah, because I just need to have 8 foot of stuff move down a 10-foot hallway.
Right.
So if I have to squish it, I need 9 feet at least. So I have 6 inches on each side. But I don't want 8 feet or 9 feet that whole way. So, we're kind of, it can be frustrating if people think we're moving the goalpost on them. The reality is, we're just giving the optimal, knowing, like anything, that it's going to need to push and pull. And it's really, if it's 10 feet, it could end up being 9 foot 11 for the whole thing once it's built. I mean, it's that kind of stuff. All getting better, by the way, with Ben, right? And modeling. But in the old school days, we had one project in Delaware that I remember we drew a beautiful auditorium, and the client, who's the director of facilities, I think at University of Delaware, came back and was like, I'm not doing anything curved. And I said, why? And she said, they can't do curved concrete in Delaware. And I went, what does that mean? She goes, I'm just telling you, whatever it is, they cannot figure out how to do curved. We've tried it 3 times on campus, doesn't work. Do faceted. And we're like, oh, cool. So we just made it faceted instead of curved.
Delaware does not have the capacity
Sorry,
to
Delaware. Shout out to Delaware. We love you.
It has to do with the magnetic pull of the earth. It's not possible to do.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And curved concrete is hard.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I like a lot of the things you've said. I mean, it makes total sense in this last bit about really the communication and the teamwork aspects. And that is one of the challenges, I think, for everyone in these industries, in the building industry really, is to convey to clients in particular, of the things that have to happen, that should happen, and the things that they're ideal, but if they don't, it's okay. And it's difficult because it's, even for many things that absolutely have to happen, is there wiggle room? Yeah, technically, right? As you mentioned, at the last few feet of the hallway, maybe there's a little bit. But in the earlier phases, you don't have time, and nor is it a good idea necessarily to explain all of that to a newbie, a client, because it's too much. It's too much,
Right.
It's this constant game of what do I say and when. I think you brought up earlier too, and how much. It's very tricky.
Yeah. It really is. And I will also say, we're not just managing the logistics of construction and multiple trades converging in a hallway. We're also managing people.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what you were kind of saying about egos a little bit, but it's also just we can't account. So I can tell you this, if I ask for a 10-foot hallway, I need it. If you ask me, hey, we're trying to save space and we're shrinking the building, can it go to 9 feet? I'll say yes, because I've analyzed it based on what they're doing, who's doing it, the equipment, whatever.
Yeah.
I can give you an educated yes. Could it be 8 feet? Probably. It would probably be fine at 8 feet, but I know, and and kind of we all know, it's going to move in and out. It's going to shift. It's going to change. And I can tell you through experience, because I've experienced the bad part of this, is that, I'm a very practical person. I'm very pragmatic. I try to be very transparent. I try to practice radical transparency. If you asked earlier in my career, you would say to me, could that hallway be 7 feet? And I would go, honestly, it can be. I would do it at 7 feet and then get to the job, and there would be the 17 things that could go wrong.
Yeah.
And now I haven't done a service to the client or the building for the next 100 years, because we consider theaters to be 100-year buildings. I've shortchanged that client and that operation and that building forever because I didn't play a little bit of gamesmanship. I don't even consider it gamesmanship anymore, right? It's just, this is what we need to do as a team to make sure that it's successful at the end. Can we squeeze a little? Yes, be fair. But can you squeeze it to the inch that it is within an inch of working or not working? That's not very wise, because I don't control enough of the game and you don't control enough of the game to know that we'll be able to deliver on that. So, and to be fair, I guess, there are some things like that, like a hallway width or something. And then there are other things where I'm going to say over and over and over, this has to be perfectly aligned. It cannot go up and down. And like I said, our goal, and I say this to be funny, our goal is to really scare people enough, which is a funny way of saying impress upon them the importance of what we're asking for, so that they agree with it, so that when the steel is out of alignment by a half inch, they freak out and call me from the site and say, this thing's out by half an inch. Do I need to stop the erection, or stop it once we've got it all tightened up? We hope the camber comes out when you put the ceiling, the roof on, but we're off by half an inch. Can you make that up? And the answer is, well, let me see where it's at. And I can, because it's over here. So don't worry about it. So then, that's one of those times where we get to make an educated yes or no, or an educated comment. But if we had said it doesn't matter, they can go up or down 2 inches, who knows what you would have had? You would have had this one down 2 and this one up 2, and now 4 inches out, and I can't handle 4 inches. I can't physically do the things I need to do.
Totally. Yeah, the margin of error. Earlier you were talking about theaters being designed so that they are flexible to a certain degree. And I was wondering, what are some of the specific challenges with that? Is it the mechanics of having stages move up and down to allow for orchestras? Is it the seating collapsing and back and forth? Is it the lighting? How difficult is it to design a space to be kind of like a Swiss Army knife?
Well, the answer to what you want to do is always specific back down to the actual client and the actual art form and the art that they want to produce. So as I say a lot to be funny, theaters are like, a unicorn riding, a leprechaun riding a unicorn, jumping over a rainbow. They're completely 100% unique, right? They really are. So I worked on, with the previous firm, the Wiley Theater in Dallas. That was OMA. Foster did the Opera House, and OMA and Rex did the Wiley. And it's a theater where all of the seating flies out. The walls are all glass, and there's a really complicated lift system to reconfigure the front stage and to be able to move these things all around. The reason that was done for them was because that was the right answer to achieve what they wanted, which was the theater that did these things, a flat-floored space that could do these things, visibility at the street level, right? Natural light. There was all these specific criteria that happened to be the right answer for them. That's not the right answer for most people, because it was very expensive and very complicated. A lot of times what we're concerned about is when, as you would say with anything, it's a jack of all trades, master of none. We don't want to do something that can do everything, like the Swiss Army knife. The Swiss Army knife, every blade is still sharp, right? Sometimes when we do a performing arts space, if you try to do a space that does really great theater and really great music and really great film, showing cinema, those things are hard to do it all at the same time because they're completely directly in contrast with each other acoustically. They're in contrast with each other physically sometimes. So, when we do a lot of university theaters, our goal is to provide a theater that can be flexible and can do all of those things at like 92% grade, right? Is it the best it can be, like a Disney concert hall, purely concert hall? No, it's just not. But I think the right answer is to be able to say, hey, we have an orchestra that wants to play 4 times a year. Let's not build a concert hall for that. Let's put a shell in the proscenium theater. So we have some, I've been privileged to work on some really amazing regional performing arts centers that do some of those things, amazingly well and amazingly dynamically and work wonderfully for music, but also all the music stuff can go away and now it works for Broadway touring or it works for opera. So the answer to what that is about infrastructure. So you were asking about seating and asking about lifts. It's usually about infrastructure, right? So each of these forms needs a way to get stuff off a truck. You got to get people in the building, right? And then you have a stage. And so that stage, these really are empty vessels. There's a wonderful book that everybody's reads at theater school called The Empty Space by Peter Brook. And, he argues that all you need for a performance is a person doing something and a person watching it, right? So if you really boil it down, the building is a vessel, so much like a museum where it falls, it's just, you think of it in the beginning as just a neutral place, but then we realize now, these amazing facilities, it's not a neutral space. It's a dynamic space that creates this emotion and invokes these things while holding these works of art. So a theater is a little bit the same way. It's got to have these logistical tools for power and structure and getting things in and space and an audience and all that stuff. And then after that, it's really about what do you want to do in the room. We do a lot of courtyard theaters, which are just small studio theaters that have flexible seating zones because it allows them to do an in stage like a proscenium or a thrust or a small thrust or a complete flat floor. If you just wanted to say, hey, we're having a banquet or we're doing an environmental piece where people stand up and walk around kind of thing.
Actually, that might be a good... Go ahead. I was going to say it might be a good point to give us a quick definition or description of what those different types of theaters are.
Yeah, cool. So the theater that most people think of in their life is a theater with a proscenium, which is an end stage seating, meaning people are sitting facing one direction looking at a stage. The proscenium kind of creates a little picture box, right? And you're looking through the picture box into the stage. That's a proscenium theater or end stage. If you're in an arena theater, arena means you have seating on all 4 sides of the stage or 5 sides of the stage, depending on the stage shape. So you have audiences all around. If you're in a thrust theater, then that means you have audiences on 3 sides. So you still have kind of a stage zone, backstage zone, but then you have audience coming around on 3 sides. So some of the early American regional theater movement theaters were thrust theaters. So it's an amazing way to get people, 30, 40 feet within the stage, very close, very intimate, and kind of have a really connected space where the audience is connected to the stage and to each other.
I see.
So that's kind of a thrust stage. So the kind of courtyard thing would be a studio theater, which could be like what some people might call a black box, but it's just a flexible space where you might have platforms and you could do anything I just said by rearranging the platforms.
Gotcha.
So if you put them all facing one direction, that's an end stage configuration. If it's put them all around, that's an arena configuration. So as you would imagine, the goal of a college or university is to teach multiple things. So that's who's going to want to move those around for each show so that they get a different experience for a different type production. Whereas a professional theater might not.
Does the planning changes depending on the shape of the theater, or is, kind of like the entry point, the backstage, the, technical area, mechanical area remains the same? It's really just the shell that changes?
No, it does all change, and it depends on the space, right? So as you will know, the bane of existence of a lot of architecture is the emergency egress path, right? Like nothing will drill a hole in the bottom of a good idea until you go, now how do we get people out of that? So the same, it's very true of theaters, right? Even small theaters. So anything over 49 seats, right? For assembly type, you need 2 exits. Well, now the 2 exits have to be a certain distance from each other, right? Diagonal, all the good stuff. We have projects right now where we're looking, people are asking us to look at theaters and cinemas in existing buildings. And one of the most famous buildings in New York. And you're not moving columns, and it means that this works, but we don't know how to egress people out because there's no way to control that. So the planning, back to your question, the planning really does change and tweak based on the audience configuration, the audience size. Some of the rooms we do will have an audience of 100, but it'll have an audience of 500. Or if it goes flat floor, then now you need to use the code for standing, which is 5 square feet per person, or a person every 5 square feet. So that cranks up the occupancy, which now means your exiting criteria changes. So it all changes for the backstage and the forestage. At the end of the day, if you were drawing a bubble diagram and an adjacency diagram, you've got the performing arts part and the performing arts seating part. You've got a stage that's connected to that. You've got to get people and materials into the stage part, and you've got to get people into the auditorium part. And that's the beginning of every diagram, and then you just have to massage it back and forth after that.
Gotcha.
Has designing theaters become more challenging in the last, 10, 20 years? And if so, how?
It has, I think. It has. In some ways, I think it's it becoming more challenging is the right thing. And specifically talking about the American Disabilities Act and getting wheelchair access and handicap access to different zones of the theater. There was a long time when you could design theaters a very specific certain way. What's very important to us as room designers and theater designers is connectivity and intimacy. One of the things that we always note is that you would assume that there's a relationship between the performer and the audience member, and that makes sense. That's a one-way kind of relationship. The reality is, in a great performing arts space, and if you think about a lot of spaces, especially historic spaces, these are how these feel and are. The reality is it's a relationship between the performer and audience member, that audience member and another audience member, and then back to the stage. So it's this little symbiotic triangle that kind of creates and moves energy. So, in the same way that if you're in an amazing theater, maybe there's side boxes and people on the side wall. So you have this constant sense that you're in a room with people, right? So unlike a film or a cinema where you're annoyed if you realize you're in a room with people because they're talking or eating popcorn loud, in a theater, that's the whole reason you went, is to have this shared experience. So in those kinds of cases, it's really important that all of those things work together and that you have that sense that there's people connecting there. And I'm going to be really honest and say I totally lost the thought. Holy Toledo.
Well, what were we talking about? We started the question of how theater design has become more complicated.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Thank you so much. Yeah. I apologize. And back to the show. So now you have to get a wheelchair to the front row. If you have to get a wheelchair to the front row, now you have to get either a lift or a 1 in 12 rate to get that wheelchair to the front row. So this intimacy, this connection that we were talking about is really about shoving people forward, right? And getting them as close to the stage as possible. If you have to roll a wheelchair, you just now bought yourself, right, a 3-foot travel path. If you're having a wheelchair where they're backing in, that's a 4-foot deep section. You now have a 7-foot gap between the front of your stage and the back of the first row. So, that right there made theaters change. That right there was the thing that made theater design change, and that the theaters got bigger at the front row by like 3 feet. Just, when that new interpretation started happening from the Department of Justice. So the American Disabilities Act is good, and I think it's what we should do, and we are doing it, and we're successful at it. But, that changed how theater stuff is. I would say, it's like anything right now, especially, these buildings are very expensive to build. And so it's just a challenge sometimes. And, it's like anything, everybody has a budget, mo money, mo problems. Even if it's a big budget, it just means your swings are bigger, and it's even more dramatic when something goes up a percentage point. It means it went up, $30 million or $3 million or whatever the project is. So clearly you guys have had an opportunity to be in theaters in Europe and France, particularly perhaps. You go to a theater in another country, especially Europe, especially an older theater, and it's a different feeling and it feels different. And it's because the codes are different.
Yeah.
So it makes a better performance experience. Is it safer, like from a life safety standpoint in fire? I don't know. I won't comment on that. Right. But does it make a better performance and a better feel when you're in a show? Absolutely. So, now having said all that, there's nothing about what we're doing now that we're still not creating pretty great theaters and, amazing spaces that are still very, very connected and dynamic places that are great to perform as an artist, great to see a show. So, all those things are all figure outable. It's made it just that much harder. And frankly, it's just another logistic thing that we have to manage.
Yeah.
I have to say, I very much enjoy the coziness of European theaters and the tightness of the spaces, but also, recliner seating when you go watch a movie in the US. I very much enjoy that.
I know what you mean. Yeah, it's like I'll give you a really specific example. If you were saying what's a row to row spacing, seat back to seat back in the US, I would just, there's a lot of things that go into the answer, but normally it's about 3 feet, 36 inches.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You go to Europe, it'll be 34 inches. It's literally 2 inches closer. So it means they can fit more people closer, but it means it's harder to let people walk in front of you, right?
Yeah.
So it's more like being in what we would think in the U.S. It's more like being in a sports venue, like an arena or a basketball arena, where the row to row is much tighter because all they want to do is fit people in and cram people in. So, so I enjoy seeing shows in Europe as well. I think it's an amazing feeling when you get to have that. But it's just very slightly reduced here in the U.S., but still wonderful.
So there is not a trend of using recliner seats for arena or performance centers.
You mean lazy boys?
No, I think you're out of luck, Marina. I think you're out of luck.
Damn it.
I mean, we've all seen this cinema trend, and we tend to do, we do screening rooms. I think is probably the best way to say it. We don't really do cinemas like
movie
theaters and stuff like that, but we'll do screening rooms for movie studios or private clients.
Or theme park too. I feel like there is a lot of
parks,
performing.
Yeah. So, it just depends if you can get away with having if it's not financially driven or for the model. So, there's a cinema that I go to a lot it's my current favorite, and it has the recliner seats, and we don't really go for the recliner seats. We go for the full bar and the full menu. Right.
Oh, that's cool.
So we're ordering lunch and a beer to have, to watch a movie. But the finances of that organization aren't, as you all know, with movie theaters, they're not making money off the film. They're making money off the food and beverage.
Yeah.
Is that something, have you ever seen a performing center or theater that does serve cocktails and food during a show? Is that even common?
What happens? I mean,
it's like a live performance?
I don't know about food, but cocktails, yeah.
So there are still theaters that are called dinner theaters. Certainly, it's like a showroom vibe or a dinner theater vibe. There are still those, and they serve food and drink during the show. Drinks during the show, I had this conversation yesterday, are quite common, and I think will become more common. If you go to a Broadway show or any major theater company, you will have an opportunity to pay $15 for a rum and Coke in a sippy cup that says Kinky Boots on it, and take it back to your seats, right?
Yeah, we've done that.
Because just like every other industry, you will make more money off food and beverage than you will a ticket price. So, we're the kind of group that, works with clients, and I can show you on paper because we've done it several times. It's cheaper. You will make more money selling beverages and letting them take the beverage into the theater and then replace your seats every 5 years than saying you can't take beverages in because it'll ruin the seats.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Because that's why a lot of people do it. Yeah. So historic theaters are different. I get it. You have floors and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's cheaper to let them to make your money off your food and beverage and just replace the seats.
That's crazy.
Financially. Yeah.
We're due for a remodel. Sell more drinks. Come on.
Sell more drinks. Yeah. No, absolutely. We had a conversation yesterday with a client, and they are starting to do some remodeling of the theater, and the exact thing came up, and it was a historic theater, and they said, we never have been able to because we're worried about sticky floors. And I said, Fair enough, but I could show you, do the math, run your food and beverage counts against labor to clean every night and replace the seats every 4 or 5 years and tell me what you find out. I said, I know the answer already. You will make money. Significant, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Interesting.
So
is the maintenance on performing centers, like what is that on like a building that's maybe is going to be planned to be around for 100 years? Like, do you have to replace the seat often because they break, or like the technology is outdated, you got to rip out the system and change it for something new?
Yeah, it's much different than other building types, but also exactly the same, right? So it's different in that the equipment is unique and special and has different life cycles. So capital planning, capital expenditure planning, we help our clients with if that's their request. So things like a sound system, like we were talking about the mix and the audio mix earlier in the show. Sound systems really only last 3 to 5 years. Every 3 to 5 years, you have to replace everything.
Oh wow!
So if you're in a big theater and it's $1.5 million sound system, you should be saving $150,000, $300,000 a year to replace your sound system every 3 to 5 years. I can tell you that most places don't do that. Like every other client we all have, deferred maintenance, right, is a term that we all love using, which means you haven't changed your air conditioning system in 40 years, and now the project is here and we need to fix it. So in theaters, it's a little bit different though, right? Because it's a performance-based building. So if your sound system doesn't work, it's a problem. If your sound system is old and the clients that you're trying to book see what you have, they will choose to go to another venue if you don't have the latest equipment, if they have a choice of going someplace that does. Lighting systems last longer than sound systems. Rigging systems last longer than lighting systems. They all kind of have different lifespans. I was in a wonderful theater here in Los Angeles yesterday. The rigging was installed in 1927.
Whoa.
It was updated in 2004 or something, and it had a lot of original components on it. And that theater had managed to function for almost 100 years without upgrading some of the components of the rigging. Now, the rigging was condemned during our visit and said, you shouldn't do this anymore, right? Like it should have been fixed 50 years ago. But that just shows you, like any other building type, people, if it's still working and you take care of stuff, it might last longer and it might not last longer. So a little bit different. And then the public parts are the other part, right? Like seating. If you have people in and out 8 to 10 times a week, then your seats are going to get, shoot up faster and replace it.
So you guys are involved kind of ideally from the very beginning. You might actually be the first phone call for a feasibility study. And even when the project is completed, construction is done, and it's being operated and used, are you still like on retainer for clients to call you with these kinds of things, or how does that work?
Well, much like I'm sure some of your clients, we always feel like we're on retainer, right? Because we certainly do get phone calls. I say quite genuinely, once you work with us, you've kind of bought the relationship for life. So we're always very happy. We do work to try to maintain a relationship with the clients and the client base and the operations folks when we do open a building. But it really depends on the needs of the organization. Oftentimes, when you're building a new building like this, they're either staffing up because it's a new organization, or they're moving over, or they're adding capacity and already have an organization that's there. So. We get a lot of phone calls just about questions. We encourage people to call us. As I say, if I had a magic wand at the end of a job, I would wave my magic wand and have the owner's manual for the building show up, right? Because they get O&M manuals for every component, for the faucet, right? And for, the rigging system, but they're not going to get one on how to use the building. The hundreds of hours of time we've spent thinking and talking and planning, all of that doesn't end up, it ends up in the physical building. But they don't know why we did it. They don't know the why. So we kind of say, hey, you have any questions, or like, I'll give you an example. I was in a building once when they were loading in the first show, and one of the guys said, I really wish you guys had given me a way to get a cable from here to here, because this is killing me. And I said, well, there is one. And he said, where? And I said, well, move that box on the wall, and there's a hole through the wall right there. And he went, oh, look at that. Right. So that was them just moving quickly and, not having a chance to review all the materials and know that everything was there. But, it's very difficult to kind of come into these buildings that are performance buildings again and just hit the ground running and start, and then be able to learn everything. So we really encourage people and say, you have any questions, even if it's, seems silly, just please call, because we may have an answer that can save you time or money or, pulling your hair out or whatever.
Yeah. And it also, it's kind of funny. It's not a great feeling when you've put thought into something and the user or the client or whoever doesn't know that it's there, and it makes their lives more difficult and they don't know it. You're like, we spent time solving this for you. Please make use of the thing I've created for you,
Absolutely. And, again, we're constantly, we try to figure out how to answer a question before it's asked. So like one of the recent strategies we've started is installing a doc box, which is like a document box that's literally a metal box on the wall with a key on it. And inside of it, it can hold a binder. And we're starting to assemble things that we think might answer some of those questions just based on the design documents. Because, I was at a project opening last week with Pfeiffer and Perkins Eastman. And the owner, they said, we don't know how much weight we can hang from this thing. And I said, well, did you look at the structural drawings? And they said, what structural drawings? Right? So this was the brand new building, meaning you would think this is when it's not mysterious and it's all solved and it's all there. This guy didn't have a clue. So we were able to say, well, let's figure out how to get you those drawings. They all exist and they're a PDF. They're not even big rolls anymore, right? I can email you the answer to your question. So he was just like, oh, this is amazing. This is great. So, just that right there again. So it's very present right now in my thinking, because I was like, last week, the guy was like, yeah, I don't know any of this stuff. I'm like, it's all in the drawings. And what drawings? So we're trying to figure out how to leave a USB key, right, in this little box that says, here's all your, here's the drawings of the building.
Yeah.
So at least they have that kind of stuff.
And your phone number on the outside of the box. Call us with questions.
Yeah. We'll put our company name. We stopped putting our phone number. And it's a kind of a joke, but a lot of the equipment that we have, we will put the manufacturer 24-hour hotline on the Lamacoid label on the equipment, right? So if you have a problem, that's who to call to fix it. We used to list our phone number because we were really okay with people calling, except when they would call us first at 3 a.m. and say, this thing doesn't work. And I would say, did you call these other people? And they would say no. And I was like, well, call them first. Then call me back tomorrow if it doesn't work. So we stopped putting our phone number on.
I'd imagine that would get problematic with all the different equipment and the many theaters.
Well, in many different time zones, around the world. Yeah. So we'd be getting calls 24 hours a day.
That's funny.
I was wondering, in terms of contractors, like we do architecture and we do modern and non-traditional, so we can't work with any contractors, right? We have to have some sort of alignment. Is there such things as contractor who specialize in building performing spaces?
There certainly are some that have done it multiple times. Our typical joke is, if you've ever done one once, you probably don't do one again, But there are certain firms, certainly, and you would not be surprised that they're all larger firms: Turner Special Projects, McCarthy, Whiting Turner, J.E. Dunn. There's firms that have found a joy in doing the work because it's very meaningful to them, just like it would be to the rest of us. We did a wonderful project, the project I did with Moshe Safdie's office in Kansas City, the Kaufman Center for the Performing Arts. That was with J.E. Dunn out of Kansas City. And they absolutely loved it because, they love every project, and every project is, every kid you have is special and you love them all equally. But, it's really, performing arts centers are really meaningful to people because it's such a community-based thing that really, is an expression of joy, hopefully, a lot. And so it really resonated with them. So, after that project, I've probably done half a dozen different projects with them as a contractor because, big and small, because they just decided they liked it and they thought it was fun and it was meaningful and it was, resonated with them. And so they just kept pursuing it. Certainly same thing with larger companies like Turner or Turner Special Projects. They have a corporate memory that serves them well, and they're able to learn from these things and be efficient about them and understand the quality that is required. So kind of like you inferred, you can't just hire anybody to do this specialty work. Yeah. The Gary office interviews the contractors, right? You don't just get to pick one and say, do this. You have to make sure they have the ability to do something that is that unique and that sophisticated.
No, it's super well said. And actually, we were talking about that exactly just the other day. Of oftentimes, like we do residential work primarily, so we're in a very different space. But this I think sentiment applies to basically any kind of building where, you know, the client presumes to be the one that's going to select the contractor, and they do have final say, but without any input from the rest of the team. It's like, but we're going to be the ones working with the contractor, like very closely. Like it would be nice if we were involved in that. That would just make sense, you know, from a team building standpoint.
It does, and I can say, you know, 99% of the projects we're like you, we just get assigned. The contractor is chosen, right, on a good day, which we have, you know, usually on larger projects, but on good days we'll be asked if we have recommendations, or if we have, would we like to sit in the interviews, would we, you know, do we have any commentary, and you know, that always feels good because it feels like they're really just trying to get to the best product at that point. So the higher the stakes, the more concerned they are with that, so that's why we tend to do it on larger projects.
Right, that makes sense. You know, I was wondering for theater, oh no, I had two questions. The first one, which is a little bit specific, is there a general rule for a typical theater or concert hall of how big the back of, I don't know if you call it back of house, but all the support spaces is compared to the footprint of, you know, the stage versus the theater seating itself?
There's no relationship between the two. So much like people saying, how much does a theater cost per seat? It's just, it's bad data. Or, you know what I mean? It's like looking at the data wrong. So the answer to your question, like everything else in a theater, is what is it that they want to do, and how are they doing it, and what do we need to accommodate? So like back of house would be everything from the dressing rooms to a green room to maybe scene shops and prop shops and costume shops and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, as you would imagine, if you have a performing arts company that is just music, they don't need a costume shop or a prop shop. And they may not even need a lot of dressing rooms, because musicians tend to not change clothes a lot in the building. They come dressed in their tuxes or their clothes. But if that's the case, but you're still doing touring orchestras, which means they're coming off a bus, they're going to need to change clothes. So, you know, you kind of literally have to sit there and grab all this data and capture it and then sift it until it says the right answer is 4 6-person dressing rooms and 2 50-person you know, changing rooms with 4 all gender changing rooms, and a very large performer lounge, and then a really big wide hallway, because an orchestra could be 100 people with a choir of 100 people. So you have 200 people backstage that have to queue up and get ready and use the bathroom at intermission, right? So you know, the answer to that would be different than if it was a university program where they also did opera, which means now I have to, you know, add shops and add costume shops or wardrobe maintenance. Yeah. So it really is, again, it's a very unique answer depending on the artist, the art form, and the logistical parts of what they do and how they do it.
And you might have answered the second question, which is whether or not the theater itself, not the back of house stuff, the theater itself, if there's ever like a standard template or cookie cutter plan that works generically, and I'm kind of speaking from a presumed ignorant perspective, where let's say that's on the that's set, and all the other stuff is going to change depending on the site and the access and the architecture and all that stuff. But, you know, for a client, they might be assuming, well, isn't there just a plan that exists? You know, I know there's not, but I'm asking the question anyway.
Should be simple, right?
Yeah, it's a fair question. Well, I can tell you there are lots of theaters in this country that happen to magically match what was drawn in architectural graphic standards, right? So the go-to book that we all own and sitting on our shelf, there's theaters in there, and there's a lot of theaters that look like that. And that's because, you know, there were theater consulting is a fairly new, you know, it's only 50 years old in the U.S. It's from the 70s on, really, you know, and I'm a second generation firm, meaning the firm I worked for was first generation, you know, of a breed that there was a half a dozen firms in the country. And now there's, you know, 25 that are spinoffs of those half a dozen. So there's a lot that look like that because you know, there's rules of thumb, I would say, right? So like 30 degrees is the angle off the edge of the proscenium. You don't want wider than that because it's hard to see, right? There's kind of those kinds of things, but the shortest answer is there's really not. And I'll tell you why. Because, and you'll know this from, you know, the work you do. what are the grades of everything? So I can tell you the most annoying thing that I say the first meeting of every project is, I can tell you the elevation of the stage. And they said, how do you know that? And I said, because it has to match the top of a 4-foot loading dock where the truck is. And so you tell me where a truck can go, I'll tell you that the dock is 4 feet tall, and I don't want to change elevation from there to the stage. That's the stage elevation, right? So if that's the case, now the stage elevation, now I've got a stage front height, I've got all these subtleties, I've got differences in seating styles, like you were talking about recliners. Some people need wider seats, some people want efficiency and or narrower seats. We do a combination of variable widths, actually. Entries, exits, ADA stuff. The program, meaning, does it have music? Does it not have music? Is it pure theater? Does it have cinema involved? Is there, do they want a Dolby Atmos system like in cinema that people are doing in theaters? If that's the case, there's extra space required. Am I landlocked on something? So there really is kind of no short answer. Certainly, if you start to look at a bunch of theaters, that you'll start to see a rhythm, right? There's an orchestra section, which is the sloped part. There is there's a parterre section, which is slightly elevated and stepped because it's the only way to see over the orchestra. There's balconies, there's side boxes. So there's all this, I would say there's Lego pieces that you use, but you have to assemble them in specifically the right way for that particular art form, artist, site, seat count size, right? Different sizes hall have different rules. Is it a straight row? Is it a curved row? There's all these kind of subtle little levers that you start to pull that make them all spin off and be completely unique.
Right.
Even if you started off the same, they never end up the same.
These kinds of projects sound so complicated that, is every theater being constructed? Is there always a consultant like you guys on the project? Because it would seem almost like, assuming there's some level of budget and people are not hacking away at something.
I think
how would you?
There's probably a threshold where, if it's small enough and straightforward enough and they have any experience, the black box theater may not need a theater consultant, but typically if you don't have one, then that means you're calling a manufacturer or a local theater dealer to sell you stuff, kind of design build style.
Right.
That certainly happens in some places, but yeah, I would say most projects that you would think of as that's a nice project, even if it's not complicated or expensive, probably has a theater consultant. In the U.S., there is the American Society of Theater Consultants. It's North America and South America. I think in the entire 2 continents, I think there's less than 300 members, I think. So that means those people all represent the myriad of firms, and those are all, I would say, the large and medium-sized firms. And then there's a lot of guys that are like 1 and 2 person shops that used to be the head of the theater department and then retired and became a theater consultant kind of thing. And then they're doing small projects. But yeah, I would say this, most functioning theaters have a theater consultant. If you're ever in a theater and it's jacked up, it's a very good chance they either weren't a strong consultant or they didn't have a consultant at all. I will tell you, I don't know how many, but we occasionally, regularly, but maybe once every few months, we'll get calls from folks that have tried to do things themselves. Yeah. And are, kind of painted themselves in corners and then just couldn't figure it out, and then call us and say, hey, we'd love to hire you. And then you realize they're in the early DD phase and you're like, well, that's odd, and then you start looking at their drawings, they're like, well, this doesn't work at all. Same vein. I've gotten called in, I've done peer reviews for theaters that were at 100% CD phase. And we do a peer review and show them that, you can't see the stage from the balcony stuff.
Brutal.
Because they didn't have a theater consultant. And so I have projects where they stopped the project, fired the entire design team, hired us, started again, hired a new architect, right? And just did the whole thing again because they just kept doing it without a theater consultant. And frankly, it got out of hand and it got away from them.
Yep.
And it was these little subtle things that they didn't quite see happening. And then to be fair to the architect, the owner was a very strong owner who was pushing on things and demanding things. And so in conversations with the original architect, it was very clear that the reason they were there was the owner, not the architect. right? But nonetheless, it got out of hand. And so we were able to, frankly, be a stronger influence.
Yeah.
We were adamant, if not, just saying you can't do that. And at that point, at least because it had been so catastrophic, they trusted us enough to say, yeah, we get it. We'll yield on that thing we kept asking for.
That's fascinating. I mean, that goes directly back to something we were talking about earlier. You had mentioned of, you have to know when to be confident in what you're saying for certain things. And because for a number of reasons, but one of them is that conveys that you're the expert. And when you have a strong client, it can be uncomfortable if you're not a strong-willed person, I suppose, but you kind of need to, right? Because it's in the moment, sometimes it feels easier, right, to just let it go. But in the long-term vision, you got to look out for what's best for the project and therefore everyone else, including yourself and the client.
That's exactly right. Yeah, no, I will say that I had the benefit of watching really accomplished people do this work. And I can tell you that one of the biggest takeaways I took from it was you have to speak truth to power. You have to do it respectfully. You have to always be a kind and constructive team member to everybody. We're not just the guys who get to be a bull in a china shop and say, this is my thing, do it or else. But I can tell you specifically that I have clients today that have told me that the reason that they hire us is because our ability to deliver the bad news. And just say, and not just deliver bad news, but still get the project back on track and get it working for everybody, not just for us or for the client, for the electrical or the mechanical or the architect. So, I would say it's something that I've been being fair. I'm 6'5". Can't tell because I'm sitting down, but I'm 6'5", so I'm a large person. I have a large personality. It probably comes more naturally to me than it does other people. But I can tell you that my confidence doesn't necessarily start with that or come from that or generate from that. It really comes from the fact that I'm really just trying to get the best thing. So it's almost like when you have a kid and you have to do something painful, that is in their best interest, but it's going to make them cry or it's going to make them sad, and they don't understand why at the time. You just have to get kind of comfortable that that's the role. I can tell you that I am comfortable at any time if somebody doesn't enjoy that or doesn't kind of do that, and we've done our good job and been kind and polite and constructive. If that's not what they want to hear, we're comfortable firing the client and saying, we don't think we're a good fit. This is really important, and you asked us to help you with this, but you're not listening. And if you're not going to listen to us, we're not mad. We just want you to find someone you will listen to because you're not listening to us. Right. And it's important you listen to us, or you're going to have a building that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, and I've said that a couple times, and I'm happy to say the client, it kind of jolted them, and they were like, oh, okay. So, okay. What I mean? It was like, oh, you're willing to walk away. And my theory is my reputation is more important to me as a firm than one project and one client.
Yeah.
And so I'd rather walk away from something if I know it's going to make it not work. And it's got to be pretty catastrophic.
Sure.
To walk away and know that I just want them to be successful, and it's just not going to be with us because, you're not listening to us. So we're not effective, and we'll take the blame. It's not you, it's us. Find somebody you do listen to, right? Because you're not listening to me anymore. And it's important that you listen. So.
Yeah, that's a great perspective to have. Not an easy one if you have your own business, and also with the kinds of projects that you're doing, they're big projects. You don't want to sign on to something, and it's better to pull the plug or go separate ways earlier than when you're way down the line.
Yeah, and it's function based. I compare theaters a lot to kitchens, right? Because kitchens are very function oriented, and what kind of kitchen is it? Depends on the kind of food you're cooking. Do you want to cook everything? Cool. Then put a wok burner in, but also put in multiple ovens, right? Is it just an Asian wok style kitchen? Cool. Put in 7 burners and 1 oven. Like it's very specific. Kind of the same thing with the art form. What's the art form? What are we doing? It'll tweak and change everything. But it's gotta work at the end of the day. It's just gotta work. And if it doesn't work, it's damaging to people's finances. It's makes it hard to do, it makes the art bad, if you will. It makes the food not be able to be cooked and served hot. I mean, I'm now evidently hungry after that conversation. But you get my point. It's like this is kind of, it's a functional building. So, you know, hospitals are functional, and I know every building is functional, but like these types of buildings, you know, like a zoo has to work perfectly to move the animals left or right. Like it has to. And if it doesn't work, somebody gets hurt, right? Or the animal gets hurt or whatever. So there are kind of really important things that are make or break points that you have to get right. And if somebody's just like, yeah, listen, I don't care about that part, then you either have to be able to say, I'm letting it go, and we gave you warning, and I sent you letters on letterhead, and gave you all my official stuff. Or I can tell you, I've had stuff that are kind of life safety stuff or kind of important, dangerous type things that we've just said, if we're saying not to do, we're advising you not to do this for these reasons. If you go ahead, then it's at your own risk. Yeah. And at least, it's because that kind of stuff. So, not very often, but every now and then.
Yeah.
My last question is that I saw that you guys did a marionette theater.
Yes.
And
I'm so excited you asked.
And I was trying to find pictures. I couldn't find any.
No, there's pictures. It's funny because on the website it says like, we have this number, this stats, like big numbers, like 136, 50, and then one on the very
one
end.
Marionette theater. Yeah, 350 theaters done. 120 architects, one Marionette theater.
Right. Yeah. It's great.
Yeah. So we were lucky enough. Bob Baker Marionette Theater is a theater, LA institution. They've been around, I can't remember, 60s, I think. It was founded by Bob Baker, who was the original marionette designer did a lot of work with Disney. So like Sound of Music, the little marionette show that they do in the movie, those were Bob Baker marionettes, and I think Bob doing the marionettes. So, he did some of the original design for like It's a Small World stuff, I think. I could get that wrong, but, this just amazing thing. And it was this little theater, and it turned out after LA built up around it, it kind of ended up under an overpass on the kind of wrong side of town. And it still drew kids and their parents constantly. And constantly. So they were being ejected out of that home because it had been sold, and they were moving into a new spot. And they contacted us, and we were lucky enough to become the official theater consultant for the Bob Baker Marionette Theater. And it's just this wonderful theater that I absolutely recommend everybody should experience. And it's just this magical art form of marionette puppets that they do at the highest caliber, and they tell amazing stories and have these themed shows, and they do like a Halloween show and a summer festival show, and it's just absolutely cool. And for them, they had a space, they needed to phase it, they needed to grow into it, so we helped them design like a stage structure, and then help them with some lighting and help them with the seating, and we're kind of ongoing helping them as they do stuff. But it's just absolutely if you go see a marionette theater performance and you watch little kids sitting on the floor, 4, 5, 6 years old, looking at a marionette of like a fuzzy green alien thing that they made, and seeing the little kid not understand that thing's not real, it's like the magic of theater in a single moment. It really is. It's just amazing. So yeah, we absolutely love them.
Well, we'll have to go check it out for sure.
Yeah,
please
definitely.
do. Yeah, please do.
Michael, this was phenomenal. These last few hours went by incredibly quickly. We could keep talking for sure. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button and liking and commenting on our videos.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail. If you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion, feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.